Joining us right now via Zoom chat is Ryan Grant. He is with Mediatrix Press, and they have a brand new book out on the heroines of Christ. Praise be to God. Good morning to you, Ryan.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on with us. Heroines for Christ. This looks like a very good book. Now, this is a reprint of a book that was published a long time ago. Tell us about it.
So it was first published in 1939. It's an anthology of essays by Jesuits that retell, frankly, brilliant histories of 15 female saints throughout the course of the Catholic Church. And so it's from ancient times, from medieval and early modern times, as well as comparatively recent times.
Do you have any sense of why this book was edited by Father Joseph Husselin? He was a Jesuit. Do you have any sense of why he chose these particular saints to tell their stories?
He doesn't tell us specifically why these particular ones, except that they all had a flair. Their story could be told in a very dramatic way. And one thing with the Jesuits in the history of the Ratio Studiorum, that is the Jesuit curriculum, back when this was all a good thing, was that they emphasized drama. Even in the very early days of the Jesuits in the 16th and 17th centuries, part of their curriculum was drama. And they had to learn how to construct a play, write a play, act, direct in plays, and they often would. And there's even secular books on continental drama actually include sections on the Jesuits, because what they did was highly influential to drama schools in general. And so the point of it all was that when you would present the faith, when you would go to far off lands, or you'd be in England or in Germany or wherever, presenting the faith to Protestants, that there would be a sense of the divine drama of sacred scripture and in the lives of the saints, the history of the church, and all these things could be presented in a way that's going to affect man as this great and incredible story that God has given us. And so they take, because you can read a book, this humdrum lives of the saints, or butlers, basically relating, what these people did. It's all great. Sometimes it's very inspiring, but oftentimes too, you get older books. And I was actually surprised. My wife said, "Oh, this is a great book." I'm looking, oh man, edited by Jesuits in the 40s. Uh-oh. It's like, okay, but she said it was highly influential to her when she was a teen. So I'm reading it and it's like, wow, this is really good.
Yeah.
Because these authors took that Jesuit flair for drama and the dramatic and employed it to the actual facts of history to turn it into this very wonderful biography that just has the, like reading this great dramatic work instead of some humdrum lives of the saints.
Yeah, it's a page turner. It's about finding that balance between the right amount of information and keeping the story moving ahead. And I read the chapter on Joan of Arc, and of course, she's an easy read, right? It's such an incredible story, but it keeps you riveted. You're like enthralled. You're right there. You want to see what happens next, and I think it's very well written. Do you have any personal favorites? Maybe we should start with, why don't you tell us whose lives are depicted in this particular book?
So it doesn't follow a particular historical order, but it starts with Saint Agnes, well-known early saint, early martyr, and then it goes. Then you have Maria de la Luz Camacho, who's a Cristero woman. Actually, it's probably the most recent in history in the book, and actually, we'll come back to her because that's actually one of my personal favorites from the book. Then Saint Cecilia, Saint Gemma Galgani, Joan of Arc, Saint Bernadette, Saint Catherine of Siena, Saint Eulalia is a martyr that a lot of people haven't heard of. Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, obviously, or I think in the French it's Alacoque or something. I don't know. Saint Flora, right? He was martyred by the Muslims in Cordova. Saint Catherine Labouré, Saint Catherine of Alexandria. So like you can see the interplay between modern, medieval, ancient, right? Saint Lucy, Saint Kateri Tecwitha, and then Saint Therese of the Child Jesus finishes the book. And
you were saying your personal favorite?
So Maria de la Luz Camacho. And so she was born in, she died at 27. She was martyred by the communists in Mexico during the events depicted in the movie For Greater Glory. And when they closed the church, and she had the advantage of being born just before Calles came to power, and so she was able to go to convent school. Her faith was very deeply instilled in her, and her love for the church, and so it's great sadness to her when the churches get closed down, right? And so she's doing whatever she can to support, the church and all these events. And then finally, when she was 27, communists were going to burn down the church, and the cry circulated around. And as soon as she heard that, she made up her mind, and she got up and dressed up, and her sister Lupita asked her, why are you all dressed up? And she says, when we're going to defend Christ the King, ought we not look our best?
Wow.
And they approach the church, and the mob is all around, ready to set fire to it. The priest is in the church, saying the prayers at the foot of the altar. And she's there to stop them, and they shot her right at the steps of the church.
I was reading this, and I just want to emphasize the point about like this collection of stories is so riveting. And in fact, I bought 3 copies to give away as Christmas gifts because I was reading them, and I was like, this is so excellent.
Yeah.
And particularly this story also really struck me, and I actually copied an excerpt right here, and I want to read it out loud to show like how amazing it is. Like, it's just so riveting. It goes, when the church bells rang announcing the elevation, the cries of the mob rose to a pitch that could mean only one thing: they were about to attack. A paralyzing fear gripped those kneeling in the church. Somewhere, a revolver cracked. The celebrant, fearing desecration, hastened to consume the sacred species. Outside, Maria de la Luz met the onrush. The young girl's courage facing them alone, daring them to shoot her, compelled their respect. A few began to recede. Others started to move toward her. Cursed be Christ the King, someone cried. Praise be Christ the King, Maria de la Luz shouted in response. And I'll leave it at that. But yes, it's just like watching a movie. You're reading it and you're like, I've read many Lives of Saints, and this one I was like, am I reading fiction or is this a biography? And that really struck me to the point that I went out of my way and bought 3 copies to give away as Christmas gifts. So
Praise be to God.
I definitely want to do that.
Which, by the way, we should mention, you can find, you can purchase this particular book at mediatrixpress.com. It's Heroines of Christ. Ryan Grant is our guest. He is with Mediatrix Press. Again, that's mediatrixpress.com. It is a riveting story for sure. And I think it's a lot of times when it comes to Lives of the Saints, we will often get priests stories. We'll get a lot of priest stories for obvious reasons. Or religious sisters or nuns will often come up. What about people who are in the lay state? What about people who are married? Anybody on the list in particular?
Maria de la Luz, we just mentioned, obviously it was lay. Let's see, go through them. A lot of the early martyrs were also, laity. They were not religious. And
Joan of Arc, Tequitquitha.
Joan of Arc.
I think these are great too to point out because I think there's a lot of folks that are single or rather married. We're looking for good saintly examples in our life, and I think there's some good ones on this list. Saint Joan of Arc always fascinates me. Obviously, we interviewed once Father Carlos Martins, and he told this fascinating story about how, if you don't know, Father Carlos Martins is the steward of one of the largest collections of relics outside the Vatican in the world, and he's considered one of the foremost experts on relics. And he told me the story on the show that a bishop handed him a vial of dirt once and said it was his opinion that this dirt came from the very spot Joan was burned at the stake, but he had no way of proving it. And I wanted to give it to Father Carlos Martins to be the steward of, to manage it. And so he did. Well, one day he took it to an exorcism that he was a part of, and they held it over the possessed person, and the devil howled. And he thought that was some affirmation, at least, of the story, for whatever it's worth. But it's a powerful thought to think that a great saint like Joan of Arc is a life that we can meditate upon today. Somebody who we might even consider to be heroic and virtuous even unto death. Tell us a little bit about her story.
Well, St. Joan of Arc, principally, I'm not an expert in St. Joan of Arc by any stretch, but, her story is that, she appears before the prince who had been, because all of France is divided up now between different kingdoms, and the Valois dynasty that had, the Capetian dynasty, sorry, I'm a century off, that had ruled in France had been put out by Henry V. Right, and they had to make an agreement to get the English to stop, pillaging the rest of the country. So the king, the one who should be king, is now in exile in southern France, and the English have a good part of the country, and the Burgundians have a good part of the rest of it. And so her story is largely about the restoration of order and bringing the proper monarch back to the throne. And and how to get that done. There's all these miracles that God produces wherever she goes. She gets the soldiers to stop cursing. She she gets the French forces to take Orleans. And that was considered, impossible by the standards of the time. The English had made it impregnable. They had, a lot of money funding. The French were so disorganized because everything had run largely through the monarch and through the royal court. And now there isn't a royal court where they respect. So, all the nobles with their armies are kind of doing their own thing. So, she unites all these disparate parties, but she does so with this holiness and devotion to Christ. And finally, she's brought to that passion where, she does get betrayed. She does get taken by the English. And the thing is, too, the ecclesiastical courts, they have kind of their own way of, we're going to wear you down, find out that you're actually, making all this stuff up. And they use John Gersom in his writings on spiritual revelations and different things to bring down. And they don't use him; they use his writings to break her down, basically. And she does go through this passion in this dark night, where there's certain points where her trust has to overcome her natural human feeling, doubt. Maybe it was all a mistake, and she overcomes all of that. And she has this heroic witness, even then. When even the church has betrayed her now, working along with the English political interest, and yet she's still is faithful, to that last, to finally be, being burned at the stake.
What a witness for today. So many people do feel betrayed by those in the hierarchy, and yet fidelity is the order of the day.
Yeah, formally excommunicated and then made a saint. Kind of amazing. Question about the saints, though, is so there's I tell this story often because of the rampant feminism that happens around the world and in our day. These stories of the female saints are often co-opted, and Joan of Arc is probably number one that's co-opted by the feminist to show, women power, women can do anything a man could do, that kind of idea. And a great story that I tell often, and my friend of mine, Emily, went to the store, to a half-price bookstore, and found a collection of the female saints, Butler's Lives of Saints, a collection of just the female saints. And she started reading it, and she started sending me pictures and goes, "What, did Butler write this?" And it was turns out it was an edited edition of it that had turned all the female saints into feminist icons, and it was very scandalous. So could you talk about the importance of this book and learning about the female saints untainted by feminism and authentic Catholic femininity?
Let me start with a paragraph that I put on the back of the book. The contribution of women in the history of the church is usually overlooked. But in modern times, it's customary to look for all the wrong things. Who was powerful? Who became the first woman to work in this place? Who started a movement? The women who are the subject of this book, however, were greater than any of these mundane accomplishments. They were heroines of Christ, right? So just the cover, if anyone needs to see it. And so being a heroine of Christ, maybe there is some social movement that needs redressing, Elizabeth Gaskell style, right? Of this or that sort of thing. But the real heroines of Christ, ultimately, it's not a question of what you accomplished into these secular achievements, women voting or whatever, women's suffrage. It's about your suffering for Christ, your devotion to him. And just as it is for men, but also women have a particular genius that God gave them, as well as a particular job in the world in accordance with their nature, right? And I'm not going to say be subservient, but to be humble, and they have a more natural, movement toward humility. Women actually, but it's easier for women to acquire the virtue of humility than men, largely because of their nature. And in all of these saints, even Joan of Arc, who's leading troops into battle, she doesn't have a great suit of armor made for her. That people did have that done in those times. You do see female monarchs like Isabella even that had a big suit of armor made up for them, even though it's largely ceremonial. So whether that actually worked or not, it's kind of because they would have to put a skirt. In reality, Joan of Arc would have just worn like a simple male shirt over a tunic, and in battle. So it's but the humility and their love for Jesus Christ. You see St. Catherine of Siena in the book. The Bride of the Crucified is that chapter. Amazing. And she's looked to by everyone, and she puts herself at the service of Jesus Christ to be led as he is leading, not as this or that political faction wants her to go. All the saints here, the early martyrs to wherever they always pursue their vocation. As you have St. Agnes in the beginning, that is consecrated as a virgin, and then she finds that she's supposed to be married, and so she doesn't throw a today like a tantrum the way the feminists would, and different things. What she does is she goes along it and informs her husband of this, and because he was a man of virtue, he says, "Well, all right, that's what we're going to do then. We're going to be completely celibate," because recognize that she'd already vowed her chastity to Christ. Right. And which is, and that's an amazing sacrifice for him, too, to look at that and say, I see what God's doing here. And he's telling me to ante up, and I'm going to put my cards on the table and be a man and be a holy man. Right. And so in all these things, all these various women, their devotion is to Christ first. And it's not to overturn order. It's to restore order. And there's what's that line from Chesterton? It comes to mind. He says that, I'm going to butcher it, but he says that feminism is rather like, 10,000 women who say, we will not be dictated to, and promptly take jobs as stenographers. It's, love that line. But it's, as a woman, your calling, your vocation is to serve Christ first, above just as a man, but in a very particular way, that really represents their genius. Frankly, and again, their acquiring of the virtues is a lot easier in those respects than it is for men. So, and it just like balances on the other side, there's certain things that come easier to men than they do for women. But in all these saints, what do? They looked in their situations to very humbly change everything around them for Christ, just like the mother of the home changes everything around her. You get dad watching the kids for a day. We had this yesterday, actually. And then there's like chaos, disorder. And as he tries to put all these things together, the mom comes home and then she sets everything in order. It just does. And you're looking at this, it's like, how do you get anything done? Good grief.
A minute ago, you were talking about Agnes and her husband. Teresa of the Child Jesus is chapter 15 in this particular book. Her parents, Louis and Zellie Martin, started their marriage off that way. Zellie felt she was called to celibacy, and so did Louis, and then they were married, and I think for 9 months or something. That's how they lived until the priest, after hearing their confession, said, no, you're supposed to have kids. And then they had 9 kids. Right. Praise be to God. So incredible heroic witnesses. Is there anybody on this list, or was there anybody that you would have included into this list if you had written this originally?
There's actually it's something. There's quite a few that I would have added to the list. But the book as it is good because it's not too long. It's about 200 pages. It's just about the right level, the right that it should be. So what I was actually thinking when I was talking to my wife is that hey, why don't we do a part 2? Yeah, along the same plan.
Good idea.
And I don't know if you have to recruit some people that have about the level of writing talent that the original authors of this did. But so here's I came up with my own list of 15 people. If you're interested,
Let's hear it.
Have Saint Agatha. Okay. Saint Apollonia. So this is an early martyr as we'd mix these in like in the original book. Saint Philomena, Saint Helena, Constantine's mother. Wow. Saint Paula of Rome, who was a desert mother. And then we would take Blanche of Castile, the mother of Louis XIII, King Saint Louis IX. I was good grief. King Saint Louis IX, Saint Clare, Saint Isabella, or not Saint, should be Saint Isabella of Castile. The great Isabella of Spain, St. Catherine of Genoa, the Venerable Anne of Jesus. Actually, I have a book on her. And so then Blessed Anna Maria Taigi in modern times, Blessed Elizabeth Canoria Mora. Yes, both those two were married. Blessed Pauline Marie Jericho, the Empress Zita, the wife of Blessed Karl, and Sister Genevieve, St. Teresa's sister. Wow. There was Celine. So that's the list that I would put in for a part 2. I would have added
St. Rita, Blessed Elizabeth Canoria Mora and St. Rita, they have very parallel stories.
They do.
Both were very young women who wanted to be in the religious life and actually lived that way as young girls, only to be forced into marriage by their parents, and had to suffer their husbands' infidelities and abuses, and did so heroically. And Canoria Mora, of course, her visions are like scary. They're so incredible. But great list.
Saint Mary of the Desert. I know I heard her story recently, and I was like, whoa, like that is hard hitting. Yeah, it's striking. But yeah,
Part three.
I love that. right.
Part three.
It could be making a whole series.
Volume 20.
Grift off this forever. But no, really, though, because there are so many holy women in the church, whose stories really need to be told, and they're all different. I mean, Blessed Anna Maria Taigi is like the opposite of Elizabeth Canori Mora. Although she's Italian, she lives roughly shortly after that period, or just somewhat contemporaneous. She was married. Her husband was a rough and gruff guy, but he was a good man fundamentally. And so she had visions, and this ball of light even would appear when she had visions, and God would show her things. And so cardinals and popes and if popes wanted to come wait on her, actually.
Wow.
Not Pius VII, Leo XII and Pius IX both came to see her, and then she would dismiss them and say, well, my husband's coming home and I need to have dinner prepared. So she kicked the Pope and cardinals out so she could make dinner for her husband.
Good call. Good call.
She always provided for him. So everything was ready for him, and he never had anything to complain about. He's one of these rough, hard, difficult people that everything's set in order, completely melts that harsh exterior.
Wow. One thing I was thinking about while you're saying this is the fact that, we have all these ladies who are these as you're saying, heroines for Christ. And the common thread between these people is that they live in a specific context. And I was talking to the TFP. I don't know how familiar you are with them, but the TFP, they are often hammering the point of what they call white heresy. And it's things that they call it white heresy because they said it's not exactly heresy, but the way that the saints are depicted oftenly will show a white heresy because it is not telling you something wrong that's going to be damaging to your faith, but it shows these saints in this very syrupy way that they're not living in a real context. But when you look at the lives of the saints, and I'm reading the stories, and I'm like these people were in the middle of war, they're being persecuted. There is the Emperor Diocletian slaughtering people left and right, and they're responding to the grace they're given with the in the context of the situation. Could you speak a little bit about the context in which these saints live? They didn't were just in the middle of nowhere living holy lives and on their own. They actually lived in a society.
They did, and that's one of the things in my talk on St. John Fisher, which I think you can find on YouTube. I make the point in the beginning that we're here to crash the party of secular history. And the way secular history is written is try to wall off European history or Roman history so that the saints can't quite get in. They're like these people out there, you find them in those hagiographical books that are all, second nocturne stuff you don't have to pay attention to, right? That French phrase, he lies like the second nocturne, right? Because some medieval accounts in the breviary would be just so ridiculous. But nevertheless, they are people who lived in history. And they are people that you can't just, wall off and get rid of. Like in the English Reformation example, More is someone that can be, is celebrated as a regrettable road bump on the way to so-called Reformation because he could be secularized to a certain extent. Fisher, on the other hand, what do you do with a reforming bishop who's more reformed than any Anglican bishop for 300 years and was rooting out abuses left and right and wrote the book against Luther, criticized the Pope of his day, and died a holy martyr for the church? What do you do with him? Well, you just got to liquidate him from history, get rid of him, right? And so then we're kind of stuck with this, where this is history on this side and this is hagiography, and the two somehow can't come together. And that's why really well-written biography of the saints, which is one of the things I gravitate toward in terms of choosing to reprint, crashed that secular party. And especially when written by Catholic authors who are endowed with the virtue of faith, we don't get plaster saints for whom a smile would crack their face and these sorts of things. And we don't get this kind of illuminated portrait out of the context. You get the actual context they lived in. So, I mean, all the early martyrs, Agnes, Cecilia, Lucy, etc., they're living in Roman times where the faith is technically illegal, sometimes tolerated. But Romans don't, if you're a good patriotic Roman, the thing you want to do is enforce the public cult. So that public cult is, of course, to the traditional pagan gods. And if you're in one cult or a mystery cult or whatever, in principle, there's no problem with pinching incense to Jupiter, incense to Venus or Mars, or whoever the god or goddesses of this or that city. And it's considered a lack of patriotism. It's frankly treason to not do so. That's the context in which these early saints lived. You can see a lot of this in life of St. Cyprian as well. and so if you're a Christian, especially if you're a woman, has very little defense in Roman society. Women very rarely have. Actually, another candidate for a sequel would be Saint Perpetua.
Oh yeah, sure.
And in her maid Saint Felicity, but Saint Perpetua, she was a Roman. She was educated, and a lot of times when you were the oldest daughter, when they were first born was a daughter, a traditional Roman household would expose them. Actually, that is, they would throw them out so they'd be killed by the elements, because you want to get that boy first, and once you get the son, now it's good. And that was something in the pagan world was customarily done, actually, all throughout the world. And so the Romans, this was a big problem, actually, until the influence of Christianity kind of put a bad turn on this. But Perpetua's father decided, he looked at her and he couldn't do that. And so she was raised and educated in his home. That was a rarity most of the time. So when you were, I mean, just even look at the structure of names in a Roman society. So a child, he has his father's name. And then you have what's called a praenomen, which is, Marcus or Titus or Gaius. These are kind of names that everyone gets to distinguish them within a particular household. And then you have your nomen, and that's the family name. Emilianus, Caesarius, etc. And then you might have other names that come around. I'm sorry, Julius, it would be the name Julium, the gens Julia, right? And so that was your tribe. That's the family name. And then you get another one. So girls within this family, they're going to get the father's name, and that's it. That's their name. So you have Julia Major, Julia Minor. If you have two daughters, and you didn't often want to have too many more because that's going to be a dowry you've got to pay out. So there were more men than women in the Roman Empire. Right. So this is already a tough world to be born into.
Yeah.
And it's not much better as you go east, because the cultures are largely the same with a lot of these expectations. So when you have, these heroic women like Agnes, Cecilia, Lucy, that, stand up for their faith, they're losing everything. I mean, just embracing the faith in those times, they know they're going to lose everything. But that's the point. He who keeps his life loses it in the next. He who loses his life in this one gains it in the next.
Something you said a minute ago really sparked a thought in my mind. I love history. I like reading, especially church history. Warren Carroll's my favorite church historian. I recently just went through a novel on the 16th century and the wars we had with the Ottoman Empire, specifically naval battles. And, and I love Lepanto. I eat it up. I eat that story up so many times. But so many times they're like pious retellings of the story. And they gloss over a lot of the grittier details to make things sort of embellish the highlights, so to speak. And as you were saying a minute ago, you sort of brought up a question that we might need to clarify. Hagiography versus mythology versus biography. Maybe you can explain a little bit the differences between these things and so what this book is particularly shooting for.
Okay. So hagiography, from the Greek agios, which is, holy, and therefore, the study of saints, that is, it's kind of like you see with like the golden legend in the Middle Ages of Julius of Veron that tells this, story. It takes stories that are loosely based on facts, sometimes even made up, depending. Although the golden legend is a little more accurate, tells stories about the apostles, fills in gaps in actual knowledge, and they're not historically reliable. The goal in a work like that typically was to depict the saintliness and the virtues of the saint rather than have it be historically accurate. And as time evolved, the demands of actual history, like Cardinal Baronius, for example, doesn't get enough credit. He's really the founder of modern historiography as we know it now. History is a science. I mean, it's largely a lot of chronicles. You read like the Res Geste of one of the deacons around Charlemagne. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. And he writes kind of like a chronicle, and then this happened and this happened. And so people are trying to be reliable, but Baronius draws in kind of like, it makes it a science, to use that Enlightenment term. In trying to write the history of the church and the Annales. And he goes through manuscripts that he had to be taught how to read in order to, gain information and find the veracity of, all these things at a time when the Vatican Library was not organized. He started that process. He's going around to, nobility that might have dug up manuscripts somewhere and they're trying to sell them to the highest bidder, and he's getting money to get a hold of these things, right? So the whole principle of primary sources and what's our source for this? And then and so that demand puts a demand on hagiography that it has to be at least, based on actual history. It can't have, things that are fallacious historically. And so, but hagiography still has that basic aim, as its goal is not to tell history. The goal is specifically to show the virtues and holiness. And that's not a bad thing, by the way.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with a good book or a good pamphlet on this or that saint that's going to tell us about. So I sell 2 books on John Fisher. I'll illustrate this. One is by Father Vincent McNabb, and it's a wonderful book. It's not very long, and it's wonderfully written, much like this book, Heroines of Christ. And it depicts his virtues, but it also is historically accurate. It's based on one of the first biographies of John Fisher that came out. I sell another one by Reynolds, and that book is actually a fantastic work of historical biography, and because it's tracing everything from the sources of the period and basing it on that. And that's what makes a good secondary source, even in secular history. And yet it's written by a Catholic who is a mind to Catholic faith. And so he's going to also, relate things in such a way where it's pious, but it's also historically accurate. So much like you see in secular biography, where the goal is, or at least it's supposed to be, and you're going to base it off of your primary sources and what you can demonstrate in terms of documentation, and you establish your timelines and what have you. So that's really the goal. And then you have mythology of things where, legends come up in popular rendering. Somebody remembers a legend and puts it into a book, but, there's no, critical apparatus because it's like the 9th century or something like that.
Right.
And so there's not a lot of, people are going to be very, local that are going to be
was very true.
well-minded.
That was also very true for Padre Pio, one of my patron saints.
Right.
During his life, there were many books written about the miracles associated with his life while he was yet alive. I have a couple of copies on my bookshelf at home, and they're so general and generic and obscure. So and so showed up and thus happened. It was just It's like there's no detail, there's no meat on the bone. They just tell us these pious antidotes there. So that might be another example of this type of material you're talking about.
It is very much the same. You hear a story. Now, there's stuff that has been proven, like there was this lady that was born with no pupils in her eyes, but she could see. And it had been scientifically demonstrated that she can see. But there's no explanation for how she can see. That's a documented miracle. Versus, so-and-so came and this happened. But there's I hear like Padre Pio is actually one of those ones. Someone will tell me, and one time Padre Pio said, well, oh, great. Where can I find that?
Yes, exactly.
I don't believe it, but I'm not going to be a jerk about it. So, I am a jerk, but I try not to act like it all the time. So where can I find that? Please tell me. And they're like, oh, I don't know. I heard it. I saw it on Reddit is basically the equivalent. Yeah. I saw it in this or that forum. Well, can you find a book that I could find that in? And it's like, and I've gotten into various books from Padre Pio. It's like I can't find where any of this stuff happened that I'm usually hearing about. He said, 3 Days of Darkness is another one that's lacuna. Padre Pio said there'd be 3 days of darkness, it'd be this, and they're like, all right, that's great. Where can I find it?
Yeah,
and I can't find it anywhere.
Especially after he was forbidden to even write to his spiritual directees. For very early on in his life, in his priestly life. Adrian, you were going to say?
Speaking of crushing people's dreams, the blue. Could you make a comment about the Blue Pieta book? I had saw a discourse you had on Twitter about the Blue Pieta book, and I know I was very scandalized with the Blue Pieta book a few years ago because we grew up with that in my family. We used the Blue Pieta book for everything, and we were found the section on never criticize a priest, and then the St. Gertrude prayer was the thing that came up on Twitter that you made a comment on. Could you talk about that briefly?
Not the St. Gertrude. Oh, yeah, the St. Gertrude prayer in terms of the promises associated with it, that it's going to release some 1,000 souls of purgatory every time you say it and whatnot. That's never been approved by the church. That doesn't show up in any official material by the church, although the church has not officially said anything about that I know of. There's also prayers in the beginning of that book on St. Bridget, and the Vatican actually put out a monitum in 1954 saying that these prayers with the associated promises that come with them may not be published. So it's basically giving a condemnation of the promises. It didn't say anything about the prayer per se. I was mistaken about that when I first made the comment, so I corrected myself. But it was the promises associated with the St. Bridget prayers in the Pieta book, where it said that you can't publish these together because those promises are not anything the church has ever approved. Right. Wow. And so there's seers in the book. I don't have their names handy. One's French and the other I can't remember, but also named in the monitum that have not been approved by the church, but they were in other books. And so the Pieta book's kind of like a collection of these that were circulating in Europe. And so there's good prayers in that book. There are solid prayers in that book. I had that book when I was first a Catholic, when I was in Steubenville. And I was a young Catholic, kind of not knowing much about the faith at all. And that Pieta book was actually, I had that and I prayed so many things out of it. And it's like I said, there's good things in that book without doubt. I would say probably 80-90% of it. But then there's like these little things from these seers. There is a portrait that's attributed to being like from some seer that she received a vision of Our Lady, and that's what she looked like. That also has not been approved by the church. There's a lot of different things in there in the Saint, and then those promises on the Saint Bridget prayer not approved by the church. And so that's why. And people want to gainsay that today too, because there's so much corruption, malfeasance in the church. But the fact is, they still have the authority. They still have the authority to judge these things. And that's even if you don't believe in the modern authority, before Vatican II, when you do believe in it, they had that then too. So either way, there's a reason why Christ constituted that authority to help us to look in these things and to, if God wants it done, he's going to grant that through the church. They're going to grant that, okay, this has nothing in error against faith and morals. You can use it. Yeah. But like promises like that, I mean, that are, like every time everyone says this prayer, 1,000 souls will be released from purgatory. I mean, if you do the math on that, I think it would be hard to come up with that there's even anyone in purgatory, if that was so.
Someone famous once said there's a reasonable hope. Anyway, that's a different topic for a different day. Right. We are just about out of time. We are just about out of time here, but we've been talking with Ryan Grant from Mediatrix Press. The book is called Heroines of Christ. You can find it at mediatrixpress.com. Great book, very inspirational. Thank you, Ryan Grant, for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, praise be to God. God love you. God bless you, and have a great day.